I've been meaning to film this video for a while because I've been very excited to share with you my new 47 colour main watercolour palette. Now, those of you who've been with me for a while may remember that last year I shared the same palette. I'll show you the palette in a moment. I had chosen 47 colours then that I thought would cover my every need. Well, as time has gone on, I think a year or so has gone on since I made that video and put that palette together, I have found that I'm just not using some of these colours. So this is the swatch card from the original palette, and you'll notice a difference when I show you the new swatch card from the revised palette. So it still has 47 colours, and you'll see that they're much more muted. I've kept a lot of them. I've actually changed 18 of the colours. So I'm going to run through which ones I've changed and which ones I have added. So which ones have been taken out, which ones have been added. And then I'll show you the actual palette itself, and we're going to swatch all of the colours. I know I have them swatched here, but these are really small swatches. So to really see the beauty of them and the variety, because some of them are granulating, some of them are slightly colour separating, I'm going to do some larger swatches in the Etcher watercolour sketchbook. This one I've decided to start today. It's a new one, and I'm keeping it just for my watercolour collection from now onwards, rather than actually just swatching them on bits of paper which then go into a folder. I thought it'd be nice to actually have a proper book that I can refer to, so everything's in one place. So all of my watercolour swatching, I think pretty much I'm going to be doing in this book from now on. So we're going to start with the main palette because it seemed like the best place to start. Hello, this is Editing Natasha. I'm about to chat for quite a few minutes about the colours I took out of this palette and why. So if you're not interested in that, please skip to 15 minutes 30. Right, so you see that I kept Buff Titanium. I really love the Daniel Smith Buff Titanium. I'll actually talk to you more about these colours as I swatch them, so we'll just go through them quickly. I've taken out the Daniel Smith Hansa Yellow Light and the Daniel Smith New Gamboge. I just was never using these colours. I know they're good mixing colours, but the way I was using this palette, I wasn't tending to mix very much. I have other palettes that are more, they're built to be mixing palettes basically. But with this one, I just want colours that really inspire me when I look at them, and I can use a lot of them just straight out of the pan. I can mix them if I want. There are different colours I can mix here, but I found that the traditional mixing colours, they just don't suit my way of painting. So whenever you put together your own palette, be dictated by the colours that inspire you, the colour palettes you work with, the colours that you love. Don't worry about how other people put together palettes. Get ideas from other people. You can often find colours that you love through watching other people's swatching videos or where they're sharing their palettes. But always put together a palette that's tailored to you and your way of working. So that's what I've done, basically. I've been using this for a year, and I found that there were some colours I just wasn't using for whatever reason. Doesn't mean they're not nice colours, it just means that in my work I don't use them. So what I did is I sold a lot of these colours, put them into little themed sets, and I sold them to my patrons on Patreon. I do that with my secondhand art supplies on there. I sell them at lower prices to my patrons because I'd rather they had a new home than just sitting in the studio. I don't want to just hoard colours for the sake of it. Okay, let's get on because I'm rambling. So I took out the DS Hansa Yellow Light and the New Gamboge. I've kept the Jackson's Naples Yellow. I think that's a really lovely soft Naples yellow. I've kept the Jackson's Yellow Ochre. I've taken out the Beyond Indigo Peach Haze. This was a handmade watercolour. It kind of felt a little bit too similar to the Schmincke Horadam Naples Yellow Reddish. Just found I wasn't really using that one. This is slightly more orange and it's still very subtle, very peachy kind of looking. I've kept the Jackson's Venetian Red. That's a really nice Venetian Red. taken out the Daniel Smith Transparent Pyrrole Orange. Again, too bright and I just wasn't using it. The Winsor & Newton Rose Doré, lovely colour, but just wasn't for me in the end. And the Daniel Smith Pyrrole Scarlet, I've taken that out as well. So a lot of this top row has changed. The Pyrrole Scarlet is obviously a good mixing colour, but for me, I just wasn't using it. I've also taken out the Daniel Smith Red Fuchsite. I was attracted to this colour initially, but I'm not super into the fact that it has this kind of pearlescent, slightly glittery quality. That doesn't really work with my style of painting, so I've taken that out. I've kept the Daniel Smith Lunar Red Rock. And you can see along this top row, the ones I've added in the new palette are the Schmincke Horadam Titanium Gold Ochre, the Holbein Yellow Grey, the A Gallo Antique Gold. I wanted a light fast gold paint, and this is lovely. This is a gold, it's metallic, but it's very subtle, which is what I was looking for. I've added Roman Schmalz the tint. I've added Daniel Smith's Burnt Sienna Light and Daniel Smith's Minnesota Pipestone. And those two obviously were the ones that I kept. So for the second row, we have the Daniel Smith Sugar Light, which I've taken out again. It's a beautiful colour, but it was slightly iridescent, pearlescent, whatever you want to call it. So slightly shimmery, didn't really work with my painting. I'm just going to point out the ones I've taken out actually. This will be quicker. I have taken out the Roman Schmalz Mineral Violet. I just wasn't using such a bold purple. I've taken out the Daniel Smith Quinacridone Rose. It's just too bright for me. It's a beautiful colour again, but too bright for my style of painting. I tend to favour, as you can probably tell from this new swatch card, muted, earthy colours. So colours that are a little bit more subtle and a little bit softer and gentle, but I also love some really deep, rich colours, particularly blues and greys. Okay, I kept the Potter's Pink, didn't I? Yeah, I kept that one. I took out the Winsor & Newton Caput Mortem Violet. It's gorgeous colour, but it was just too similar to the Lunar Red Rock and the Schmincke Horadam Perylene Violet. I felt like I didn't need more of those colours. I have enough here. So I added... ones I added on the second row here are the White Nights Marengo, really lovely, quite coolish grey, and the Sennelier Light Grey, which is a real blue grey. That's a very cool grey, absolutely lovely. Very much the kind of colours I love using in my work. The Isaro or Isaro, I don't know how you say that, powdery pink. That's a beautiful vintage dusky pink. So that had to go in this palette. And the other ones, yeah, they were already in the palette, so I just added 3 new ones, I think, on the middle row. Yeah, so on the third row here, I have taken out the M. Graham Anthraquinone Blue. Again, a gorgeous colour, but I just found I wasn't using it. I tend to err towards more of the Mayan Dark Blue or the Payne's Grey, sort of a more inky blue, whereas this one's a bit brighter. So I took that out. I took out the Daniel Smith Kyanite, again, because of the slight pearlescence or iridescence. And I took out the Daniel Smith French Ultramarine, which is another great mixing colour, but I just wasn't using it. I wasn't mixing with it, well, not in this palette anyway, and I wasn't using it as it is. That's way too bright for me to use in my normal work. I also took out the Daniel Smith Lunar Blue, just because I had quite a few other blues that I wanted to try. I love the Lunar Blue and I've kept it, and it will probably go in another palette. The Daniel Smith Phthalo Turquoise is another lovely colour, but again, I just wasn't using it. So the ones I've included on the third row that are new to this palette are the Michael Harding Cosmic Blue. This is a really amazing colour that I hope you will see a little bit better when I do it in a slightly larger swatch. It needs a larger swatch because it's a really interesting colour. I shared this with members of my swatching club on Patreon recently. I send out a dot card to members of the swatching club with 6 different dots of watercolour from my own collection each month. And the Cosmic Blue was actually one of the first ones I did. And yeah, it's an amazing colour. A new colour to me. Michael Harding has only recently released this range of watercolours, so I'm kind of looking forward to exploring them a bit more. But I included the Cosmic Blue. I also included the Daniel Smith Blue Apatite because I'd had this for a while in a tube and hadn't put it in any palettes. I really wanted it in this one. I think it's a very interesting colour, which we'll see a little bit more closely, a little bit better later on. The Winsor & Newton Payne's Grey, one of my favourite Payne's Greys, had to make its way into this palette. And I actually decided to include the Schmincke Horadam Cobalt Green Turquoise. So this was really a replacement for this Daniel Smith Cobalt Teal, which is on the bottom row of my first palette. You see it's very similar, but it's a more subtle, muted version. Again, it was too bright. I just wasn't using it, and I wasn't using it for mixing either. I've heard that it makes really good mixes, but I just didn't seem to use it like that, so I took that one out. So that's kind of a replacement for that one. And the Isaro Nordman Green is a new one as well. This is an amazing green. When I do a larger swatch, you'll be able to see that better. So on the bottom row, the ones I took out were the Jackson's Warm Sepia, just because I wanted to include some other sort of brownish, earthy colours. I wasn't really using that one that much. I do like a sepia, but in this palette, I kind of felt like I didn't really need it in there. I feel like if I wanted to mix a dark brown, I could probably do that with the colours I have and make it slightly more reddish if I wanted to add some of these, like the Burnt Sienna Light or the Minnesota Pipestone and so on. What else did I take out? I think that's it. I think I kept everything. I did, apart from that one, which we've talked about. I took out that one. So on the bottom row here, I wanted to include Daniel Smith Black Tourmaline. This is a new paint that I've recently bought, and I wanted a black, but I wanted it a little bit more interesting. So this is very granulating. And I also included Daniel Smith Grey Titanium. I love their buff titanium, this more sandy colour, but I thought that this one would be an interesting colour to have in my palette for all sorts of nature subjects. So yeah, that's a new one to me recently, but I quickly fell in love with that. You'll see a bit more why I like it so much a bit later on. I'm going to explain that to you while we're swatching. I included the Schmincke Horadam Random Grey 2022. This is a limited edition paint, but it's honestly one of my favourite greys I've ever used. It's so beautiful. And for those of you who don't know, I'm sure a lot of you do, but it's made from all of the surplus pigments from their watercolours from 2022. Any surplus pigments they had left over, they mix it all together and you get this really interesting granulating colour separating grey. I've been using it for all sorts of things. Had to go in this palette. I also added the Royal Talens Rembrandt Dusk Yellow. So that's a really interesting granulating dark yellow. And I think all of these were in the original palette. Yes, they were. So there we go. I've talked you through what has changed, and I think the time has come to show you the actual palette, and then we're going to just swatch all of the colours, which will be really fun. It'll be nice to really share these with you. These are some of my favourite colours to use in my everyday work, so yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. So this is my actual palette. This one came from Jackson's and I got it a couple of years ago, and it has stickers on here by some artists that I'm friends with. I have a sticker from Kelly Conway. She's a printmaker. One of my own stickers that had to go on there. These little sheep are Sarah Burns. You might follow her here on YouTube, Sarah Burns Studio. I have this little bird. This is by Fiona at Particle Press. And I have several stickers by Crixus as well. And I'm sure several of you follow her here on YouTube. So let me just show you what this looks like. I did clean it a while ago, but I have been using it, so I've been doing a little bit of mixing here actually. But there you go, that's how the colours look in the actual palette. To me, this is so incredibly inspiring. Every time I get it out and open it up, it excites me, and that's what a palette should do for you. So as I said before, always follow your instincts when it comes to building your own palette. You know what colours you use, you know your preferred colour palettes for your work, you know what inspires you. So yeah, let's swatch these gorgeous colours. So we'll start with Buff Titanium. This is a colour that I wouldn't want to be without in my palettes. It's a fantastic mixing colour, and it makes the most beautiful muted mixes. So if you're a fan of muted colours, you like softer colours, Buff Titanium is a must-have in your palette. I tend to favour softer yellows rather than brighter ones, so a Naples yellow is perfect for me. This one is the Jackson's version, and it's just a gorgeous buttery soft yellow. Someone recommended Schmincke Horadam's Titanium Gold Ochre to me a while ago, and I found it to be the most beautiful colour, especially to use in autumn landscapes. So that's why this one is included this time. Yellow ochre has been a staple in my palettes, regardless of medium, for many years now. I like really rich, earthy colours, and yellow ochre I just find is one that has so many different uses. It's a great landscape colour, so yep, it's always in my palette. This one's the Jackson's version. The Holbein Yellow Grey is a relatively new colour for me, and it's the first time I think I've put it in any palette, but I can imagine using it for my style of coastal landscapes, and I also think it would be a good colour to use in night landscapes too. The A Gallo Antique Gold is the kind of gold I've been looking for. I wanted a metallic gold, but I didn't want it to look too blingy or too brash, I suppose you could say. This one is quite subtle, it has a subtle shine to it, and I love the fact that it's an antique gold, so it's kind of a soft colour. This is a perfect light fast gold for having in this palette. The Schmincke Horadam Naples Yellow Reddish is a lovely soft peachy colour and is fantastic to do autumn leaves. It's good for autumn landscapes. Roman Schmoll's The Tint is kind of along similar lines to the Naples Yellow Reddish, but it's slightly deeper, slightly darker, and again it's good for autumn landscapes. The Daniel Smith Burnt Sienna Light is a new colour for me. I've always been a big fan of burnt sienna in general in my palettes, but the Burnt Sienna Light is just something a little bit different. It looks beautiful in a wash, and I can just see that I will use this for so many different things. I'm really liking the combination of cool tones with warm tones at the moment, and this is the perfect warm tone. Daniel Smith's Minnesota Pipestone is another new colour for me. It's one that I bought only very recently, but I really love it both in mass tone and wash, so I knew it had to have a place in my main watercolour palette. Jackson's Venetian Red is such a gorgeous, rich colour. I love the earthiness of this red, and I've realised that these kind of reds just suit my work and suit my style much more than the classic scarlet red. And the Daniel Smith Lunar Red Rock is such a gorgeous, rich colour again, and is at the darker end of these rust tones that I have on the top row of my palette. The White Nights Marengo is the only White Nights colour I have in this palette. It's a gorgeous blue-grey, quite dark, and perfect for stormy skies and stormy seas. The Sennelier Light Grey is another lovely cool toned grey, and this one will be perfect to use for skies. I tend to use a lot of grey in my work, and I particularly like cool greys, so I can never really have enough of them. Daniel Smith's Lunar Violet has been a favourite of mine for a couple of years now, and it's in several palettes actually. It's something that I use for night landscapes. I love the fact that it's granulating, so it has an amazing texture, and it can look almost black in mass tone as well. It's quite a versatile colour. Roman Szmul's Shadow Violet, like the next one, Misty Morning, also a Roman Szmul colour, are both colours that I don't use that often, but I really like having them in my palette. They're both colour separating, so I can only use them in certain paintings, in certain situations, but they're just gorgeous to have. They're just really magical colours. Schmincke Horadam's Tundra Pink is one of my favourite of their super granulation colours, and it's had a place in this palette I think since the very beginning, so it definitely had to stay in there this time. Isaro's Powdery Pink is a lovely vintage muted dusky pink, and just the type of pink I tend to use in my work if I'm going to use pink. It's not a colour I use all the time, but I do like having it in my palette. The Holbein Shell Pink, I think, surprises people that I have this in my palette. It's not a typical colour that I would use, but there's something about the combination of pinks that I have in this palette. And there are occasions where I might need something that is a little bit more pastel-y, a little bit brighter. So the Shell Pink is just the perfect one for me. It also looks really nice in a wash as well. I always like to have a Potter's Pink in my palette. It's a gorgeous vintage granulating pink, very natural looking, and the Schmincke Horadam version is lovely, but I also like the Winsor & Newton one too. It just so happens that I chose the Schmincke Horadam for this palette. The Royal Talens Rembrandt Dusk Pink is another one of those colours that I don't use that often, but it's just so interesting I have to give it a place in my palette. It can also look almost black when it's used in mass tone, but it has this amazing colour separation and granulation, and it's just a very magical colour. Someone recommended the Schmincke Horadam Peroline Violet to me a while ago, and I kept it in the palette because I wanted a really dark violety red, and this one fits the bill perfectly. Roman Schmall's Lazurite is truly a colour I wouldn't want to be without. I love this really pale, translucent blue-grey. It's absolutely perfect for the kind of skies I like to do if I want a slightly lighter sky, like a summer sky, but without the intensity of a cerulean colour. So yeah, Lazurite is the perfect one for me. Schmincke Horadam's Ocean Grey is a very interesting colour. I just love the fact that it's a combination of blue and grey, and it's quite colour separating as well. Just a really interesting one to have in the palette. Michael Harding's Cosmic Blue is a new colour for me, and I decided to put it in because it's just the kind of blue-grey that I really seem to love. One thing I did notice is that it doesn't seem to separate as much on this paper. I've used it before and it was really colour separating and very interesting, but for some reason it doesn't seem to do as much on this paper. So I think the paper you use definitely has an effect on the colours. Daniel Smith's Sodalite has long been a favourite of mine. It's the perfect dark blue, it's granulating, has a really interesting texture, and I use it a lot in my night landscapes. Daniel Smith's Blue Apatite is another really interesting blue. It's very granulating and I decided to add it to the palette because I bought a tube of it a while ago and I hadn't put it in any palettes yet, but it definitely deserves a place in this one. Winsor & Newton Payne's Grey is one of my absolute favourite Payne's Greys. I own quite a few. This one very much as on the blue side, and it's just such a gorgeous colour. Daniel Smith's Mayan Dark Blue is the perfect dark inky blue. Daniel Smith's Payne's Blue Grey is another gorgeous shade of Payne's Grey. As I said before, I can never have enough Payne's Greys, so even though a few of the colours in this palette may look kind of similar to each other, they each have their place and they can look quite different also in more of a wash. So for me, a lover of inky blues and blue greys, I can never have enough of them. Daniel Smith Jane's Grey is another favourite. It's kind of like a more violet toned version of Payne's Grey. The Schmincke-Horadam Cobalt Green Turquoise is the one that's replaced the Daniel Smith Cobalt Teal. It's just a slightly more muted version. I was finding the Cobalt Teal a bit bright for my general colour palette. So this one offers something a little bit brighter, but without being too much. The Schmincke-Horadam Forest Blue is probably one of my most used colours, and I'm going to show you some artwork that I used it in recently. The Asaro Nordman Green is a new colour. I wanted something that was a little bit more vibrant, but still had the kind of, I don't know, blue-green, slightly darker quality that I tend to like my greens to have. So I've added it to the palette and I hope that'll put it to good use. Daniel Smith's Black Tourmaline is a new addition. I wanted a black that was granulating and a little bit more interesting than just a normal black, so I went with this one. M. Graham Neutral Tint is a useful mixing colour, and I actually just like it on its own as well. I think it's a really nice, slightly violet leaning dark grey. The Daniel Smith Bloodstone is a really useful colour for me. It's highly granulating and textured and is just a really nice, interesting brown. I'm going to share with you a piece of artwork I made recently where I used the Bloodstone for the forest floor, and I also used the next colour coming up, which was grey titanium for the trees. I spoke a little bit more about Schmincke Horadam's Random Grey 2022, a limited edition paint at the beginning, but I want to show you how I used it in the hills of this piece. The Royal Talens Rembrandt Dusk Yellow is another very interesting colour. It's kind of between the greys and the greens in my palette, because even though it's dusk yellow, it does lean towards green somehow. It's kind of a yellowish green. With its colour separating and granulating properties, it's a really interesting colour to add texture. The Maymery Blue Green Gold isn't something I use very often, but it's a beautiful colour. It's so transparent and it almost glows. It's a great mixing colour to use with the other greens, and it's also good if I just want something a little bit brighter to contrast with the more muted colours. Holbein Davies Grey is a gorgeous colour. I would say it's far more green than grey, but it's one of these lovely muted greens, very soft, very natural, and is definitely the kind of colour that I use a lot in my artwork. I'm afraid this bit of the footage for some reason went out of focus, but will soon be back in focus again. The Daniel Smith Rare Green Earth is another lovely, subtle, natural green. The final three greens, the Schmincke Horadam Cobalt Green Dark, the Sennelier Greenish Umber and the Roman Schmall Vivianite, are all quite dark and very natural looking greens. I just enjoy having a lot of these shades of green in my palette, so I'm going to leave you to enjoy the rest of the swatching, and I'll be back at the end. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my new watercolour palette setup with you. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you perhaps found it useful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so if you enjoy the videos. And don't forget to click that little bell icon to be notified whenever I upload a new video. Please let me know in the comments section below which colour out of all of these was your favourite. And tell me also, which colour could you not be without in your own watercolour palette? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next video.